do when, after 4 decades of building a business from grit and vision, you turn the final corner to your plant and find the night sky ablaze, your people safe, your equipment gone, and your leadership on the line? For Joe Elphick, that was August 2005. Sirens, smoke, satellite trucks, and the terrifying knowledge that his second shift was inside. By grace, everyone was safe. The company's equipment was not. In the days that followed, Joe and his team set up Command Central in trailers, leaned on a national network of peers to keep orders moving, and discovered two life-saving words in their policy: business interruption, that bought precious time to rebuild. Out of that crucible came a philosophy of resilience that now lives in his blue book, True Fulfillment, where he lays out the true method, which stands for test, reframe, understand, embrace, and 10 commitments that move us from quick hits of happiness to lasting purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Rowe, and this is Life Jacks, the Resilience Podcast. On this episode, I welcome Joe Elphick, retired entrepreneur who spent 4 decades building a pharmaceutical packaging company from the ground up. He's a proud dad of 3 daughters and a newly minted pawpaw, a board member, consultant, fundraiser, cook, golfer, offshore angler, a man who splits his time between the North Carolina coast and highlands, and a person who believes that happiness is fueled by classy people, which are those who help others expecting nothing in return.
Sometimes life gives us lemons. Sometimes it gives us lemonade. Other times it gives us something entirely out of left field that makes us say, WTF. But no matter what obstacles come, there is most often a way out on the other side, and we are once again victorious. My name is Dr. Rowe, and you are listening to my podcast about resilience. Every guest shares a tragedy to triumph story to give listeners like you the inspiration to push through every single day. Listen now as my next guest shares how they were life-jacked.
Hi, Joe. Welcome. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show. How are you?
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. I'm just fine and excited to be participating in your podcast. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's another day in paradise.
Absolutely. Now, Joe, take us back to that night in 2005. What were the first 3 actions you took between seeing the flames and then leading your team the next morning? Because being able to pivot after a catastrophe like that is not easy.
Yeah, Dr. Rowe, before I answer that, I'd like to tell your audience first how I was told about the fire. The front of my house was under construction, so my front door was not available to the policeman that arrived approximately 1 o'clock in the morning. But awakened by extremely loud knocking on the back of my house, I was half asleep, go downstairs, I see a policeman with a flashlight. If you could imagine my racing thoughts of what this could be about, I focused something bad might happen to one of my 3 daughters, who I thought were all fast asleep, but they are teenagers. Good girls, but what else could I think at that moment? When I opened the door and stared at the policeman with fear of extremely bad news, he asked me if I was Joe Elphick. I stuttered the words, yes. He told me my plant in Clayton, North Carolina was on fire. I can't believe how I was relieved at that point. Because again, all I thought of my kids, something was bad. And that was something more materialistic, a fire. That was my first instinct. Of course, then the fire took precedence and it was different. But it was dark. It was a 30-minute ride to the factory. As I got approximately a half a mile away, I saw flames in the sky, loads of emergency vehicles. I felt my heart racing in fear that employees could have been hurt in these massive flames. As I walked up to the site, my second shift foreman informed me that everyone was accounted for and safe. Programs that included scheduled fire drills all throughout the year. When we had those people were giggling and laughing, this is silly, but man, it saved lives at the end of the day. After I vividly remember start staring at flames shooting at the building, I'm standing by myself, and I decided to practice something I learned a while back about stress management. And what I learned in stress management was there were two questions I had to answer. One, what is the worst case scenario in this situation? And two, can I accept it? That said, I thought of the worst case scenario at this point was, well, people are fine, but the business is destroyed, equipment's gone, my hospital. Myself, I could handle that because I could get a job with the experience I have. I could sell my beach house. I could sell the house we live in. I could rent the house. Then I'd have enough money to send my three daughters to college and afford weddings for them someday. And after I went through that mind dance, I informed the news reporters that people in charge of fire and my employees that were out there emotional. Believe it or not, right after that, after my car, drove a mile or two to McDonald's. It was open 24/7. I ordered 130 for fire. It was, and then the next morning we started all over again. But that was the night of the fire, and it waited till about 6 in the morning. I went home to rest to take on the next day.
You said never say die only works when you've built relationships in advance. So how did the independent carton group become your lifeline? And, how can listeners out there build a network before they realize they even need it?
Yeah, boy, Dr. I will never say I'm the smartest in the room, nor the dumbest in the room. That said, I often say I am the luckiest one in the room. I was contacted early when the group only had 8 members at the time of the fire. They have close to 20 members independently owned folding carton companies throughout the United States now. We all have different niches in the industry. Mine happen to be pharmaceutical packaging, folding cartons, medical leaflets, etc. Of the 20 members, only 3 had procedures in place that were suitable for my pharmaceutical customers for me to put work inside of that they would approve. Actually, prior to the fire, we were all good friends, sharing technologies, leveraging purchasing, sharing good manufacturing practices, etc. All that said, I can't tell your listeners how to build a network before they need it. It'd be like me trying to figure out what bad luck is ahead and see if you could find good luck ahead. But I will say this, I have no doubt in my mind I built good relationships with those people in the past as they did with me. And the fruits of those friendship and trust were magnificent. But I will say to your listeners, more friendly and trusting relationships they could build will definitely reduce any vulnerabilities of bad luck in the future.
Oh, that makes so much sense. I mean, because I can tell you, though, like you said, you can't tell people how to build a network and who needs to be in it, right? Because you just never know. But I can attest that building relationships with people, it does come in handy because you never know when you may need these people in the future.
What's hard to realize in business especially, we compete. We compete with these people. It doesn't mean that we can't join them. Of course, legally, we can't have any kind of issues illegal, but be good to your competitors. There's no reason we can't help each other when disaster strikes. And fortunately, that's what I was able to do. I had good relationships with competitors, and when things went bad, my customers approved me to move my business to these competitors I had friendly relationships with.
Yeah, I guess that shows the power of community and, how important it is to build a good, solid community or network of people that you really, truly can depend on or have trust and faith in, for sure.
So true.
Now you have a phrase that, I had never really thought about having in any of my policies as a small business owner, and perhaps if there are listeners out there who are also small business owners. But that phrase is business interruption. And by you having these 2 life-saving words in your policy, it changed your timeline from panic to possibility. So please explain business interruption and how did you think of that?
That is a great question. I really wish I could say I was the smartest in the room again, but I have surrounded myself with good management teams and just very smart people. I always try to hire very qualified people. And when it came to insurance, that bored me. I'm an ADHD. I don't want to read that stuff, but I had controllers in place.
Yeah.
They took the time to look at this. But what business interruption does, it guarantees you a profit, a set amount for a period of time. So let me use an example. In your policy, you take this business interruption out. Let's say you're going to limit it to $3 million, just a random number. What that means, $3 million in a year's term, is $250,000 a month. So the insurance company will agree, we will pay you your profit for a period of time, and it's usually a year. So that would be $250,000 a month that they would give me for a year. Now, it's the best interest of the insurance company to get me back up and running as soon as possible. And that was evident. What they wanted to do was get me up and running so they could shorten the amount of money that they'd have to give me in a business interruption. And that was the strongest lever that I had. These insurance companies there's two of them. There's one that sells you the policy, and the other one is the one that will pay you when you need it. And the first thing that happened was they came in and they started doing all this slow stuff, and they're saying, this is not in your policy. You have a leash, you have this, you have that. And then I basically said, okay, whatever you want to do, then just leave my property, and we'll worry about this other stuff later. But they had to guarantee my profit. Well, they came back and they said, okay, let's get you up and running as soon as we can, because, again, they want to minimize the amount of business interruption they could. So my plant burnt down completely to the ground, major pieces of equipment that had to be purchased in Germany, Switzerland, and Spain. If you can imagine logistics, and we were back up and running in 10 months, only because I had a great management team. We all worked hard to get there, but the insurance company was bonded to get us up and running faster so they would reduce their liability in business interruption. So fire was in August. We're back up running in May. So theoretically, they saved June, July, and probably part of August of $250,000 a month to get us up and running.
Wow. And so, people who are business owners, because I know you have this playbook. So what would be, or some key things to have in their insurance or contingency playbook aside from business interruption?
I think that's a good question, but a loaded question. And I really believe the crux is to have a good insurance broker that is well established, but could walk you through the lines and have your management team. Let's ask the question, what if a hurricane hits me? What if we burn down? What are all the vulnerabilities the business have? And ask them right there, where are our vulnerabilities? Because it's endless. The scenarios are endless. I was just very lucky that, I shouldn't say lucky at a fire, but it turned out to be good in the long term. But when it happened, I was asking my team, let's talk about our insurance. And I didn't even understand, I shouldn't say that, I didn't know we had this good coverage of business interruption until, 2 or 3 days of research with lawyers and the insurance company, what was covered. So, the best thing is get with your broker and go through the scenarios of what happens if this happens, what happens if that happens. And that could be the best thing. And to be frank, that's what my management team did with the insurance broker.
It's interesting because, most times we think about those life jack moments in our personal life, right? We make sure we have medical insurance in case we get sick. We make sure that we have life insurance policies or disability in case something happens to us and we can't work, or we want to make sure our family is okay if we cannot work and provide. There's all types of insurances all around us. At least we try to, some people do. Some people just kind of are winging it and kind of just going around in life, just blindly. But it's interesting, though, when you become a business owner, you also have to think about like you said, what happens if your business becomes life jacked, right? Like you said, there's all types of catastrophes that could happen. Some you can't even think or imagine would happen. And it's interesting as a business owner, as a leader, that you really do have to think about that and run through those scenarios. And I'm glad that you're bringing this up. And I love that, like your book, True Fulfillment, it reframes, the 10 commandments, but as 10 modern commitments. So
Correct.
how did you develop this concept for the book?
Well, that is a mystery to me still. From a guy that does not like to read novels, very practical. I'm a businessman. This book turned out to be a playbook that was really something for, I'm 70 years old and I have a 5-year-old grandchild. He's my oldest, and down to 4 more, and another one just down to a year-old. So you think back, say, my gosh, I wonder if I'll ever see these kids graduate high school or get married, all this stuff. So I really wanted to leave something to them, what their papa was about, and leave a legacy of my values and morals. And, the 10 Commandments, this book is not about religion. It's the last thing I want it to be, maybe some spirituality, but really about mankind. And if you break down the 10 Commandments, ancient times, this was something on Mount Sinai to free the Israelites from Egyptian captivity. But when you break it down, 3 of the commandments are about our Creator. The other 7 are about mankind. And most people believe that their God created mankind. So I want to transform all of that. And the other thing about the 10 Commandments is there's only 2 of them tell you what to do. The other 8 tell you what not to do. And it's kind of a pretty, I don't know. I think my mother ever just raised me and said, Joseph, don't kill, don't commit adultery, and don't steal. And there's so much that you reframe these into positive commitments. Instead of don't steal, be generous. Instead of don't kill, nurture other people's lives. And again, how this came about, there's 100 gravities to this. Maybe being a Christian is the Holy Spirit guiding me to this. Maybe it's the practical side. I lived 70 years and I want to give something back. Maybe it's the other part. I want a book that maybe has some revenue that I could donate more to my favorite charities, being the Children's Flight of Hope and Rebuilding Warriors. It gave me some good purpose, and being retired, it gave me something to think about and still stay in my productive zone, which to me, I feel like I need to do till the day I die, is be productive of some sort, not just lay there and wait to die, if that makes any sense.
No, I understand. Now you have this TRUE method, and TRUE spelled out TRUE, which is actually an acronym that stands for something. And so if you could kind of give us a real world run of the TRUE method. And for the listeners, TRUE stands for test, reframe, understand, embrace.
Yes. But the TRUE acronym I discussed in the book pertains directly to each of the ancient commandments and how we can transform them into modern commitments. So let's see if I could pick a commandment that we could transform to a modern struggle, like burnout. The 10th commandment states, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods."
Ooh, yes.
When you think about don't covet their goods, how do you reframe that into don't? What should you do? And so I transformed it to appreciation in the book. So the T is test the traditional view. So the message was not to be jealous or envious of what your neighbors had. Test that thought. Then R, try and reframe it into a positive inverse. So how do you inverse jealousy? I mean, I arrived at appreciation. You're not jealous of somebody. You really appreciate what they've done. You express that appreciation. And now the U is like to understand a deeper purpose and why it matters in our lives. And with true fulfillment, I mean, it fell right into that. Appreciation of the more we appreciate things, the happier we are, the better we look, the better we feel with appreciation. And then we arrive at E, the acronym means to embrace the commitment of appreciation. So, to start embracing that, wake up in the morning and, think of something to appreciate today and express your appreciation. I mean, it's so big what you can do. You could just see a friend and say, boy, I just appreciate you buy me that beer last week, or say to your wife, I just appreciate looking after me in the way you did. You remembered my doctor's appointment. And the more you appreciate, the more your life gets better and more fulfilled, in my opinion.
No, I can say that the more gratitude I express to people, and the more grateful and gracious I am to people who have helped me along the way, it does feel better inside. Like, it really does give me a sense of value and community. I can say.
No, you do. And again, in the book, one of the other commitments is gratitude.
Yeah.
And a lot of people use gratitude appreciation in the same venue, but it's very different. And the gratitude is one of the commitments, but gratitude is internal. You're thankful for something. You're, my goodness, look what I have. Look what we're doing. Look at my family. You feel thankful. That's inward. Appreciation is taking that gratitude and giving credit to somebody else. And, expressing your gratitude to a person is truly what appreciation is. So I think the two very essential terms and way to live your life, and one brings about the other, but gratitude and appreciation are very different. And I think they are both should be exercised. And when you can exercise them a lot, you will arrive at true happiness and true fulfillment.
So I believe that having this appreciation, right, for others and expressing the gratitude or expressing the appreciation, but then also having the gratitude, which is internal, I think that's the people that you define as classy people, right, as those who help others and ask for nothing in return. So how do we both find these classy people, and also how do you think that we can also become these classy people ourselves in our daily lives or workplaces?
Yeah, it's funny. It's a question I have a hard time answering, because a lot of this is just serendipitous. I look at the friends I have, my close friends, and they're all classy people. We're part of groups. I have 2 charities I support, and they're on either one of them or both of them at different events. And for some reason, classy people seem to attract classy people. And I don't think you could go on a hunting expedition or fishing and just find classy people. I think if you take this classy muscle and exercise and say, let me start helping people that I don't even know, and I want nothing in return, the more you do that, you're going to be at intersections with classy people. And that's what happened to me. And again, I look back on that. I can't really tell you how, but these people have really transformed into my best friends. And it's all about different organizations. My 2 charities I live and breathe are the Children's Flight of Hope, where we fly sick children and their families to specialized hospitals, and Rebuilding Warriors, where we're buying PTSD dogs for these veterans that the suicide rate is so high. So I get passionately involved in that, and the people that I know and have become friends are part of that world. And I guess that's the best answer I can give you, how you find them, but it's serendipitous.
Well, no, I do believe, as they say, you attract who you are, right? And, in a world where it seems like at times we're can be surrounded by narcissistic people, and especially, if you're a person that is a giver, and you have to be careful because there are people who are takers, that are searching for people who are givers. And, it's kind of hard to decipher between the two at times. But I think, like you said, if you continue kind of being who you are and understand who you are, and then you are able to, and like you said, you express appreciation externally, and then you also recognize it internally, I think you can spot out those people, and I think those types of people find each other, it seems like.
You bring up a good point, but think about this, that, there are narcissistic and bad people around us. That's never going to go away. But we have the ability and the privilege to choose who to connect with. And I think that's the key right there. If you choose to connect with good people, generous people, thoughtful people, they become your friends. And you don't have to choose to be with these narcissistic or bad people. It's a conscious choice that we can make.
No, that's so very true. Now, earlier you kind of talked about vulnerabilities and, in your business and, trying to determine like what are the vulnerabilities. And I think that's one of the things that in building resilience, and at least in my opinion, is you got to know where you're vulnerable, right? Like, you got to know yourself what your vulnerabilities are, like where you fall short. Because like, it's human nature. Like, you don't know everything. You're not good at everything, right? You're going to fall short somewhere. And one of the areas that I see sometimes with people is communication. And I know that communication with people, especially under pressure, can either make or break a relationship and trust within the relationship. And you went through a stressful time trying to rebuild your business, especially after the fire. You had to probably, talk to your employees. You had to talk to customers. You had to talk to the media. And all of it had to happen in a short amount of time. So what do you feel like you learned in that particular moment that could perhaps help someone else who's having to communicate to that, different varied amounts of people or stakeholders, but something that you can share that you learned about leadership voice?
Yeah, it's funny. I made this discussion earlier last week with somebody, the two things, entrepreneurship and leadership. I mean, my daughter went to college for a leadership degree, and they're teaching entrepreneurship in colleges. And, these are things I really believe are in your DNA. You could always hone your act, so to speak, but I really think people are born entrepreneurs, born leaders, and if they have that gene and they keep it going, it's what it's really about. And the leadership end, what I've learned, I had trusting relationships with my management team, my employees. They trusted me. And that you have to build that first and foremost for communication when there's any kind of disaster. If you're not trusted, it's an opportunity for everybody to leave and run away. If you're trusted, they don't want to abandon ship. They want to be with you. And during that time, the only option is to be honest. The plant burnt down. I don't know what the future is. I was surrounded with uncertainty. I had no real answers. If I had any answers of postponement called I don't know. Hang with me. I'll know in 3 or 4 days. I don't know what the insurance policy. I don't know this. And then, I had to lay off. I had 80 employees, and I had to lay off everybody because the income stream stopped. And I explained it to them, and I told them, look, find work elsewhere, but this is something I don't know what I could do. I don't know if I could rebuild. And then 3, 4 days later, I understood the insurance policy, and we started rebuilding. And first thing was, get customer service in and sales and let the world know, our customers know that we're going to rebuild this. We're going to be back. And then, I eventually hired everybody back. And, it's amazing that a year later, we didn't lose one customer. And I went from 80 employees to 300, almost 300 employees when I sold the company in 2020. But again, I think the communication as a leader, you have to be trusted. And that's what, I tell you, you don't know you need it until you have it. And I'd love to tell every manager, everybody who runs a business, if you're not trusted, you're vulnerable.
No, I think that's so true. Trust is huge in leadership. Like you said, people have to trust you and because you're leading them and you're giving directives or you're making decisions, and some decisions can impact their lives and, their day-to-day life on a really, ground level basis. So now you sold your company about, recently, a couple of years ago. And so now you've shifted to supporting organizations as a board member, consulting and fundraising. And so you're now living the retired life, right? Which what we all aspire to live is to where we're able to, still function and live our life, but not have to work so hard at it to enjoy it. So has anything surprised you about resilience now that you are living the retired life?
Well, first thing I'd love to tell everybody, don't let your goal in life to be retired. Don't let that be your goal in life to retire. Enjoy your voyage. It's a great world we live in, and if you don't like where you are, find a way to be somewhere different, but don't live for retirement. My retirement came at a good time. The business doing well. A lot of other personal factors were hitting. And when I did retire, I'd love to do a lot of stuff. I love offshore fishing. I love golf, love all that stuff. But what happened all of a sudden was golf and fishing became a job, and I didn't care for it as much. When I started getting back with relationships and business, did some consulting, when I put myself on some boards, I started paying more time to these two charities. I felt like I had purpose again. And that purpose, I think, is a seed to resilience. It gives you meaning, it gives you something when you wake up in the morning to do. And I can say I enjoy fishing and golfing again because I don't do it all the time. And when I do break from these charities and I do some consulting and responsibilities, I find there's resilience in all of that. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. No, for sure. Now, you mentioned earlier that you want to make sure that you were living a legacy and that for your children and your grandchildren, that you hope they know what Papa stands for as far as, values and morals. So I have to ask you, as a dad and now a Papa, what resilience habits do you hope that your daughters and grandkids will absorb after seeing you and watching you?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, very philosophical question. I really think the biggest thing is to truly understand right versus wrong, to truly understand it, and let your decisions be on that side. Do what's right, not what's wrong. And all decisions we make, some aren't that critical, but some require sacrifice. And, in this world, if you want rewards, there's pain involved to have those rewards. It's not easy. The truth sometimes is difficult. But if you could really reside in the world of right versus wrong and you live that, you will be a trusted person and you'll be a good friend and you'll be a good spouse because people will be able to predict your answers. And I think that is a very important aspect of being a dad, husband, and all the relationships, that people know what you're going to say when they ask a question in terms of right versus wrong.
Wow. Well, Joe, it's hard to believe that this conversation is coming to a close, but I do have to ask you, because we have been talking about resilience, and of course, that is what this podcast is all about. And you've given a couple of answers kind of centered around resilience, but I just want to ask my closing question, which is, in your opinion, what do you feel is the best way to build resilience?
The best way to build it, again, you look at people that are resilient and aren't resilient. I really think there's a DNA factor there. There's something that, whether it's ancestry, somebody's taught you want to be resilient, you want to be strong. I truly believe there's something in our DNA that you can't go to college for. You can't read a book and be it. It has to be part of your DNA, and it's like muscles in your body. You have to work out and exercise your resilience, and the more you do it, the more you'll be resilient.
Wow. Well, Joe, thank you for reminding us that, metaphorically, resilience is built before the fire or those life check moments, through relationships, clear plans, and daily commitments, and then rebuilt after the fire, metaphorically, through humility, service, and purpose. And as a reminder that those practice fire drills definitely.
You bet.
Yes, absolutely. So for the listeners, if you would like to pick up Joe's book, True Fulfillment, to start practicing the 10 Commandments and the True Method today. So we will link the book and Joe's work in the show notes. If this conversation helped you, share it with someone who could use a little never say die this week. So, Joe, how can listeners find and connect with you?
There's two ways. Again, I'm not going to write another book. I'm not an author per se. So, The book is sold on Amazon, True Fulfillment, and I have a email address that is truefulfillment@fastmail.com. I really didn't want to have a website or make this any bigger than life. I really wanted to have a purposeful book and leave it at that. Read the book, and the email address for comments and two-way conversations is in the book, mentioned several places. Again, it's truefulfillment@fastmail.com, and I'll reply to any inquiry.
So do you have any last words of encouragement for the listeners?
I really don't. I really want to thank you, Dr. Rowe. This has been a very enjoyable time to get philosophical and share some views. And, again, the book was meant to give for gifts for kids going to college or in high school, newlyweds. It's just, I think, a good way to take some ancient religious philosophy and turn it into 10 modern commitments that will help you live better and survive with mankind today.
Well, Joe, as the bell toils in the background, it's been an honor.
That's my grandfather clock, sorry.
That's with you and your family. Nothing but blessings and abundance. Please take care.
Thank you, Dr. Owen. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast. I appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. Joe Elphick, everyone. Be sure to join me next time for more uplifting stories and insights on resilience. Until then, keep pushing forward, embrace the journey, and remember that every setback can lead to a greater comeback. Dr. Rowe, signing off.